Welcome back to the Tool Crib. Today we're going to be looking at the Victorinox SwissTool. Now the SwissTool is actually one of my favorite multi-tools. Now this is going to be a heavy-duty multi-tool from Victorinox, and there's a couple different versions of the SwissTool, but today we're going to be looking at just the SwissTool. So they have the BS, which is the black oxide version to this tool. Then they have the X, which is going to exchange the serrated blade for scissors, and you can get that in a plus version or a plus ratchet version. And then they have the CS, which is actually the same thing as the X, and I think that they're just changing the name over to SwissTool X. So until they sell out of the original the models that they made in CS, they're going to continue to sell it. And then they used to have an RS version which had a rescue blade, but today we're going to be looking at the SwissTool, and it's actually my favorite of the group. I actually prefer this one over the rest of them. So I'm going to compare this a little bit against the Leatherman Surge today. Not a full-on comparison, but I feel like those two multi-tools really are head-to-head competitors. They have similar tool sets, similar functionality, price points are right on with one another, and you can accessorize them, pretty equally as well. So we're going to go into the specifications for this tool, then we're going to walk through that great tool set that it has. Then I'm going to try to give you some reasons why I think the SwissTool should be considered as your multi-tool of choice, your EDC, and then maybe a couple of reasons why you might want to stray away from it and look at something else, because there are some things, for me personally, I'm biased towards the Surge because that's what I EDC, and I actually think the Surge has a lot of advantages over the SwissTool. But when it comes to multi-tools, you have to decide what functions are more important to you as far as the tool set, as far as the design, as far as ease of use. So it's kind of to each their own. At any rate, this is a fantastic multi-tool, and I can't wait to get into it. Let's get started. Now, as I mentioned before, the SwissTool is a large frame multi-tool. It's a heavy-duty multi-tool, so it's going to be in a 4.5-inch frame, or about 114 millimeters in its closed position when it's all closed up. It's going to be about 1 3/8 inches wide, or about 35 millimeters, 5/8 of an inch thick, or about 11 millimeters. So it makes it, even for a heavy-duty multi-tool, it makes it extremely compact. And its weight is pretty reasonable at 10.2 ounces or 292 grams. It's going to fall right in line with the weight, and it's going to be a little slimmer in carry than you're going to find in a Super Tool 300. So it has a lot of good characteristics when it comes to its size and weight when you combine that with its capability. Well, let's get into the tool set. The first thing that we're going to look at is going to be the pliers. Now, like I said before, I'm going to kind of draw a couple comparisons to the Surge for this. So the needle nose on here are not really needle nose. They're more of a modified blunt nose, or kind of a hybrid plier. They're not really needle nose, they're not really blunt nose. So they're a good compromise, I think, though, and they can be very useful. They have a very fine serration on the needle nose portion of it, though, and then they have a larger serration for their main pliers. Now, the main pliers are very good on this. Then you have your soft wire and hard wire cutters. Now, when looking at the Surge, I actually prefer the needle nose, the more true needle nose design of the Surge, and I also prefer the 154 cm replaceable cutters and hard wire cutters. Now, when we're talking about the hard wire cutters, the reason I like, not necessarily because of the 154 cm, which I do like, but let's just set that to the side for the moment. I like the hardwire cutting capability on the Surge better because it offers more of an opening for grabbing onto those hard wires. The same thing with the soft wire. I actually don't like that second notch that they have in that plier for the soft wire cutting capabilities. I wish they would just leave that off and make it straight. I think that would perform a little bit better, but at any rate, that's what Victorinox does. Now, on the outside, one of the best features to the SwissTool is the fact that it has its ruler on the outside, and when you set it down, you can set it down flat, so it forms a straight edge. So that is really not listed as a feature to use it as a straight edge, but it actually makes a pretty decent straight edge for I'll tell you what I've used it for. I've used it for measuring distances on a scale on a blueprint, and it's coming quite handy for that because unlike the Surge, which has its ruler located on the inside, I can actually set that flat against the table, and so that is beneficial in that regard. Now it's going to be 9 inches or about 23 millimeters. Now if we close this back up, we're going to get into the individual tools, and the first thing we're going to start with is the knife blade. Now Victorinox uses a different alloy for their blades, for their multi-tools, and it's going to be pretty similar, or if not identical, to what they use in their knives. It's going to have a lot higher chromium content, and chromium, if you don't know, is put into stainless steel, is what makes stainless steel. But the higher the chromium content, the more shiny it's going to be, the more rust resistant it will be. And that's one of the benefits of the Victorinox. Now, one of the downsides to that is, unlike the Surge, which uses a 420HC, which is a harder steel than what you're going to find in the Victorinox pin blade here. Now that pin blade, which is pretty similar to what they use in some of it's not identical to their knives, but it's similar in design to their knives. It's going to be about 2.5 inches in length. So I like that length. 2.5 inches or greater is what I strive for in my larger multi-tools. So that's a good knife. Now, because it's softer, it's going to be very easy to sharpen up, but it's also going to dull quite a bit quicker. Excuse me. If we get flipped around here, we're going to look at the serrated blade next. Now the serrated blade is going to be a little bit shorter at 2 3/8 of an inch. They actually call this, I think they call this a wavy blade is how they describe it. So for us here in the States, that's called a serrated blade. Now, it doesn't have the draw cut functionality that you're going to find in a Leatherman style, where it has that sharp point up front for draw cut capability. But I will tell you that this blade is extremely sharp. It does its job and does it well. Next tool over, we're going to just keep on this side, is going to be our awl. Now that is a tool that a lot of people like. The difference is, in this awl, it doesn't have a sewing eyelet. Now for me, that makes absolutely no difference at all, but I know for other people that is going to make a difference. Now I like this awl a lot because it's very sharp and it has a reaming functionality as well. So it is a very, very sharp and very good awl in my opinion. The next tool over is going to be our number 2 Phillips. This has a pretty decent reach. Has about 1.5 inch reach. The only thing that I wish the Victorinox did different on this particular screwdriver is, I wish that they would coat the end of it and make it a little bit more textured so that it doesn't have a tendency to slip out of those screws whenever you really have something that's stubborn. So if they would add a coating to make it a little more grippy, I would like that. But on the whole, the screwdriver is very good. Then the next tool over is going to be our, let me see if I can remember what size this is. I think this is the 1.5 millimeter, or maybe the 2 millimeter. This is your, my goodness, I'm sorry, I don't know. It's one or the other, and I'm not, I'm American, so I'm used to imperial measurements. But at any rate, this is one of your small flat screwdrivers. The next tool over is going to be your file. Now, there's a lot of debate on this about what's better. I will tell you that the Victorinox files have a much more aggressive cut pattern on them than you're going to find in in Leatherman products. The benefit that the Leatherman's going to have over the Victorinox when it comes to the files, in my opinion, is going to be the diamond file that you're going to find on the Surge, Wave, and Charge series. I like the diamond file because I use it a lot. But the file in general is better on the Victorinox than it is on Leatherman tools. They have a much more aggressive cut pattern. So this is your cross cut pattern. This is your single file. Now, unlike Leatherman, where on the edge, Leatherman just has an edge file. This one is cut in a much more aggressive pattern and is actually considered to be a metal saw. And this thing will actually saw through small steel. So I've actually cut a 1/4 inch solid rod with this in regular steel, in mild steel. So it functions very well. Now the downside of that is if you're going to use it for that function for very often, then it's going to dull out eventually and you're going to have it replaced. Now I don't have much experience with the Victorinox warranties because honestly I've never sent anything in for the warranty. So if others do, I would appreciate if you comment below and kind of let us know how that process is and how it goes, and whether or not something like that would be considered abuse or if they would just cover it. So if we flip back around to the other side, and our next tool is going to be, this is the 8mm screwdriver. So this is, I think they call this a crate tool also, or a crate opening tool, which it doesn't make sense to me, but at any rate I consider it a pry tool and a large screwdriver. So it's an 8mm screwdriver and it works very, very well as a pry tool, much like the Leatherman tools do. And then the next tool over is one tool that I really, really like about Victorinox, and they're the only ones that do it, and that's the chisel. Now this is actually a combination tool, but the chisel in this tool is the most important to me. Then you have your wire stripper, and then this is called a cable stripper if I'm not mistaken, so, or a wire scraper, that may be what it is, wire scraper. So you have the wire stripper, and then you can scrape off the insulation with the more triangular blade there, or stripper there. Now, when it comes to wire cutting functionality, I actually prefer the Surge much better than I do this multi-tool, because on the Surge I can cut, I can strip insulation off of wires anything from 14 gauge and up really, really easily, and I can actually do 16 gauge as well, but it's a little small for the method in which I do it. Now on the Victorinox, I can go from about the largest gauge wire that I can strip effectively with it is going to be about 12 gauge. Once you get to 10, 8 and 6, it just will not do it by comparison. Now you can always use the knife, but the wire stripper itself is not going to handle that task very well. But I do love the chisel. Then the next tool over, let's see, I have to open it up this way, is going to be another combination tool. So this is going to be, I think this is the 5mm, or 5.5, maybe it's 5.5mm, flathead screwdriver. Then you've got your bottle cap lifter, which works very well. And then this other notch here is called a wire bender, I think. Now, I actually have never used that particular function, so maybe if someone has experience with that, I'd appreciate if you drop a note in the comment section. Let us know how that particular function works, because for me, if I'm going to bend a wire, I think it's just advantageous to use the pliers. I just could do it more effectively and efficiently with the pliers than I could with that little notch, but to each their own. Then the next tool over is going to be, you know what? I think the other one was 1.5mm. This is your 2mm flat driver that's going to be on the end of your can opener. Now, the can opener is going to be real similar in design to what Victorinox uses on their knives, and they've been making this can opener for longer than I've been alive. So it works, and it works well. I have a preference for the Leatherman style, where it's a draw cutter instead of a push cutter. It's kind of each their own. I just prefer that eagle claw style on the Leatherman as opposed to this one. Now the can opener does work very well, and it is very sharp. And then the last tool on this side is going to be our saw. Now the saw is a very good length at 2 3/4 inch, so it's very long. There's always been a debate about which better, the Victorinox saws or the Leatherman saws, and usually this is getting compared to like the ST300 because the Surge has a smaller saw. But I tend to lean towards the Leatherman just a little bit more. Now they're both excellent saws, And like any quality saw, they're going to be wider or thicker on the cut side than they are on the spine of the saw, which is going to allow you to cut straight through and not bind your saw whenever you're cutting into wood. This is a very, very, very good saw, though. I actually think that the Leatherman saw is just a touch better, though. And then there's one function that I really don't know where it is, and that's the lanyard hole. And I just assume that it's in this adapter for the corkscrew. I don't really consider lanyard holes a function. I don't know why they list it. They actually list the function as 24, and they consider the ruler in centimeters and inches two separate tools. So I actually think it only has about 22 tools, but you know, sometimes it's kind of weird how companies will count the functionality on their multi-tools. But at any rate, that's a look at the tool set. Now let's talk a little bit more about actually, I'm going to pull in some of the accessories that you can accessorize your Victorinox with, and then we'll talk about what are some of the attributes and why you might consider this as your EDC. Now, I don't have all the accessories here that you can get with the SwissTool, but you can get the SwissTool, and I don't think it comes in a plus version. I think you have to buy everything that you see here separately. So you can get the SwissTool with a nylon pouch, or you can get it with a higher quality leather pouch. You can also get a pouch that is going to, both in nylon and in leather, that will accommodate the tool plus the accessories. Now the accessories I have here is going to be the wrench with the extra bits, the corkscrew, and the micro driver. You can also get the same thing, but it would, instead of the wrench, it'll have a 1/4 inch ratchet plus an extra little extension so that you have ratcheting capability. They're standalone accessories except for this one. The corkscrew will actually fit into that portion right there, and it's the same on both sides, where you can actually put it into the tool, and then you, for your wine aficionados, you have your corkscrew. And I actually like that a lot. Leatherman doesn't have that unless they integrate it, and you know, it's already included like on a juice series. So that's a feature that I like. And then you get the micro driver with it as well. So accessorizing it with their accessories is a good option. Now let's get into what I feel are the attributes for this tool. Why should you consider the SwissTool as your EDC? I can think of a lot of reasons why you might want to choose the Victorinox SwissTool. First and foremost is its compact and its weight when you're comparing it to something like the Surge. It's a full 2 ounces less than the Surge. So that has to be a consideration. It carries very well. Now, no pocket clip, so you're not going to be able to carry it in that fashion, but it carries very nicely in the sheath. And its slim profile for a heavy-duty multi-tool, I think, is a big advantage. Now, the next advantage that it has is going to be its rust resistance. So let's say, as an example, that you're working, let's say you work off, you're a fisherman, or you work on the docks, or you're working near a lake, or you're working near the ocean. You're constantly around water. The Victorinox is going to offer a lot better rust resistance than you're going to find in other multi-tools because of that high chromium content. Now, it's not completely rust resistant, but it is going to be more rust resistant than those other tools. The next attribute that I think that you have to consider is the fact that it has all outside accessible tools. I really, really like that about the SwissTool. And speaking of that, all of the implements are single deployable. So instead of other multi-tools where you're going to have that clumping feature, and you know, we'll just demonstrate that with the Surge. So with the Surge, if I want to access the tools, I pull them all out, fan them, figure out which one I want, and then put the others back if I want the all. So, you know, to some people that makes a huge difference. To me, it makes absolutely no difference. I think once you get accustomed to your Victorinox, the argument is, oh, you're searching for the tool and you pulled out the wrong one, and now you got to pull the next one out. I think once you get accustomed to the multi-tool, it's going to be fine. So that aspect for some might be an advantage. For me, it makes absolutely no difference. The next advantage that the SwissTool has is they have such a smooth action on their pliers. I mean, they're just butter smooth right out of the factory. Now, a Leatherman will break in quite nicely, and in time will have the same smooth action. But initially, when it's brand new, it's gonna be a little stiffer. And the SwissTool, just right out of the box, is just butter smooth. That is another thing that I like about Victorinox tools. And then some of the tool sets within it. I'll tell you what, the chisel is my number one. I love that chisel. I wish Leatherman implemented a chisel into their multi-tools, because I think that is such a great tool to have on a multi-tool. And then if you talk about some of the accessories, a couple of things that you can't get in a Surge, and that's going to be the corkscrew for those that need it or want it. Now, I don't have much use for it, but I know some people do. And then the micro driver, which comes in extremely handy as well, which you can get in a bit kit for a Surge, but it doesn't really have, this one's actually, I don't know if it's better or not, but that's another advantage. I think that you can get that little micro driver with the SwissTool. Now, it also has standard 1/4-inch bits, as opposed to the proprietary bits that you're going to get for the Leatherman in the Surge or Wave or Charge models or any number of other Leatherman multi-tools. And to some people, that's pretty important. So having a standard 1/4-inch bit can be a big advantage. Then, honestly, it's just pretty, for lack of a better word. It's just a beautiful multi-tool, and it's really finely tuned. One of the things I didn't talk about, and that's going to be the deployment of all of these tools. Now, you'll notice the fine laser cuts in that spring, and that makes it so that each one of those tools has its own tuned specific spring. So when you pull a tool out, you'll notice that only that spring interacts with the tool. And that is a great feature, because what it allows is it allows for each one of those tools that you're deploying to just operate and open with such little force to open them. So they don't clump, and they open very, very easily. So that is another thing to consider when talking about the attributes for the SwissTool. Now we're going to talk about what are some of the disadvantages to the SwissTool, to the Victorinox SwissTool. Well, one of the things, and you might have noticed that I've cleaned this thing off several different times now, and it is just super, super hard to keep clean. It is a fingerprint magnet because of that high gloss finish. Now, whether or not that is advantage or disadvantage to you, it's just kind of annoying to me. It's not really something that I would consider a disadvantage per se. It's just hard to keep clean, that's all. The next disadvantage, or next thing you might want to consider, is the fact that the Victorinox has a lot softer steel. Now, one of the benefits to that is it's easy to sharpen, and the blades are going to be more apt to bend than break. The disadvantage is it's not going to hold its edge as long, so you're going to have to resharpen your blade more often than what you're going to have to do in a Leatherman Surge. That may be a consideration. The next consideration, and this is a big one for me, and it may not be for you, but it is for me, is the fact that the blades are not one-hand deployable. You actually have to use both hands to get in there to dig your blade out, or your saw, or your file. Now, on the Surge, the only ones that are really one-hand accessible are your two blades, your serrated blade and your main blade. But for me, because I use that tool a lot in that function, and I love the ability to single hand open my blades, that is what I would consider a disadvantage on this multi-tool. The next disadvantage that I think that the SwissTool has when you're comparing it to the Surge is the fact that I personally think that the Surge has much better pliers. Now, some people, a lot of people are going to say they're better pliers just specifically for the 154 cm replaceable cutters, and I would tend to agree with that. But a couple of different things about the pliers. First of all, On the Surge, you have a larger opening for your hardwire cutting capability, and I talked about before how I don't like that second notch on these pliers. The Surge also incorporates a wire crimper and a stranded wire cutter behind the plier head, and it comes down into more of a true needle nose. All of those are benefits for me. I actually prefer this plier over this plier for all of those different reasons. Now, the SwissTool does operate super smooth, no doubt about it. But in the end, I choose the Leatherman pliers because I think that they offer more functionality. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is not really, a disadvantage, but a lot of people will contend that the SwissTool forms a square. You have a square in your pocket, and while it is close to square, trust me, it is not square. It's actually about a degree and a half or 2 degrees off square, and from my line of work, something is either square or it's not. There is no in between. It's pretty close, but for them to design or engineer this multi-tool so that it opened up into a true square would just skyrocket the cost of this. Now, they do a pretty good job. It gets pretty close to square, but for me, like I said before, it's either square or it's not square, and the Victorinox SwissTool is not square. But that being said, it does make a very nice straight edge. I like the fact that you lose the ability to one hand open your knives, but what you gain is you can lay that down and use it as a straight edge. So if you're fabricating stuff or you're drawing stuff out, you actually have a straight edge in your pocket. It's a little tedious to pull it out and use it as a straight edge, but you do have that functionality for sure. Now, there's one final disadvantage for me when thinking about the SwissTool, and that is the fact that even though you have standard 1/4 inch drivers, you don't have a way to incorporate them with the multi-tool. And like the Surge, I can add the extension and then I can add on my bits, or like a Super Tool 300, which has a 3D Phillips, much like the Victorinox, I have the ability to add on an adapter and then the bit, and then use the tool as my handle, and I'm able to put it in this orientation and I can get a lot more torque on it. Now, you can do that with the Victorinox, but you can only do that with its dedicated drivers. You don't have the ability to add on an adapter and then the bit. I wish they made an adapter style much like the Super Tool 300, as opposed to having this tool set as independent. Now, while this tool set can be very useful and work very well, I just prefer that it integrates with the multi-tool as opposed to being independent. Now, you can get a lot of torque on it, but it's just not quite the same, and I actually prefer the Leatherman style over the Victorinox for that reason. That is the final thing that I think you should consider when deciding whether or not the Victorinox is right for you. I just feel like the driver function is one of the most important tools that you can have on your multi-tool, because that's one of the tasks that you're going to be using it for. I mean, the multi-tools are designed to help you out of those little situations where you need to tighten something up or loosen something off. And while the Victorinox has a good selection of dedicated drivers, it does not have the same ability or functionality that you're going to find in those other two Leatherman tools. So that's something to consider. Now, overall, I think that the Victorinox SwissTool is a fantastic multi-tool. I know I talked about some of those things that I like with the Surge or some of the other Leatherman tools over the Victorinox, but on the whole, as a package, it has a very, very good tool set. The chisel is a very, very important tool for me, and it's one of the reasons I like the Victorinox so much. And then the fact that it has all outside accessible tools, and that's something that the Surge doesn't even have. So you have to dig around for some of the things that you want to get out in the Surge. I think it's an A-grade tool, and while I still choose the Surge, I think that the Victorinox is on level playing ground with the Surge, and there's many reasons to consider it for your EDC. My name is Ben, and you've been watching my review of the Victorinox SwissTool. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up, and I'll see you in the next one.